Thank you everyone for joining Treeline Review for this panel on through hiking in a big snow year. My name is Liz Snorkel Thomas, and I'm one of the co-founders of Treeline Review. For those who are not familiar with Treeline Review, we're a gear review website that makes obsessively researched and tested gear reviews. We build inclusive outdoor gear stories that focus on buying right the first time and being better stewards of the planet. One thing that also makes us a little bit different as a gear review site, in addition to doing these sorts of community events specifically focused on through hikers, section hikers, and long distance backpackers, is that we're real people. We're objective. We don't have ads. We're 100% reader supported, which is pretty unique in this environment. And we're not chat GPT. We're not bots. We're real through hikers who are out here testing gear over hundreds or thousands of miles. One of the things, though, that means since we're real people, it really helps us to be supported by readers like you. So when you purchase items online through links on our website at no additional cost to you, it helps support our mission. So after this talk, should you decide that you really need a pair of microspikes or an ice axe or any other piece of backpacking gear, if you purchase through any of the links on our website, you'll be helping to support our mission. If you have any questions during the event, there will be time at the end of tonight's webinar to ask those questions. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat and we'll be sure to add them at the end of the session. And now I'd like to thank our three panelists, Renee Shira Patrick, Danielle Giggles O'Farrell, and Kate Drop and Roll Hawk. Thank you so much for joining us. Giggles, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, trails you've hiked, some of the things that you teach, as well as other activities? And also, I would love to hear about how things were like in the big snow years that you hiked, percent snowpack, if you recall, and also the level of experience you had when you first were on the PCT in that big snow year, and how you think your experience has evolved since then, and maybe a bit reflection on those decisions.
Yeah, my name is Giggles, everyone. I use she, they pronouns. I am based in Oakland, which is Ohlone land, and that's where I'm calling from now. I am a wilderness EMT, and I run a business called With the Wild Things, and I certify people in wilderness first aid. I'm also a personal trainer. I have my ARI Avalanche 1 certification, and I have taken courses in basic mountaineering, as well as like snow camping and stuff like that. And then I do think it's actually relevant also that like I did have previous experience as like a waterfront lifeguard, which does kind of affect thoughts around river crossings. I hiked the PCT in 2017. I saw someone else who's my year in the chat, which is very fun. And then I hiked the CDT in 2019. Both of those were really large years in terms of snow. I don't exactly know what the percent was, but big. And then I've also done some other trails and routes. I did the Southern Sierra High Route, lowest to highest, Wind River High Route, and then most recently the Tahoe Rim Trail. And this summer I'm hiking the Great Divide Trail. In terms of experience, when I was on the PCT, I made sure to take a mountaineering course before starting the PCT. So like learning self-arresting and like how to travel with traction, so crampons. I used ultralight crampons on the PCT. So getting some experience with that. I had experience skiing and a little bit of ice climbing, but that was basically it for the PCT. Since then, I've taken more mountaineering courses, snow camping courses, continued skiing. I don't really like ice climbing, I found out. So that's kind of my background with that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Yeah, I think that's it. And then should I talk about a little bit about fear mongering? We talked about that.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Giggles.
Yeah, so we were just talking before everyone came in about like fear mongering, which is a term that the hiking community has like kind of started throwing around a lot. And fear mongering is something that does happen. When I define fear mongering, usually it's when someone is exaggerating a hazard, so it's really not reflective of what is true. Or they're making up hazards. So I was, in my opinion, fearmongered once by someone who was talking to me about a low snow year late in the summer and worrying about avalanche danger for me. And that was obviously very scary, and it was not a real hazard. If it does make you nervous, you can usually solve it with some research. It can even be someone who's doubting you because of whatever your identity or background or gender or race is, because that is something that people sometimes judge you on. I do think it's important, though, when we talk about fear mongering, that we do allow discussions that are uncomfortable. Just because someone brings up something that makes you uncomfortable or nervous or scared does not mean it's fear mongering. There are real things that we should be talking about as hikers when we start to get near challenging terrain. So if someone is bringing up like the snowpack or the current melt or what so-and-so said a week before, that is not fear mongering. So being sure that we're labeling things properly. And if you have done risk assessment, you should not be overly stressed by either fear mongering or sessions. So thanks. That's me.
Thanks, Snorkel. So I'm a Triple Crown through hiker, and I think I'm up to 14 different hikes on long trails around the world. And I'm based in Bend, Oregon. So Bend is where I've called home for quite a while. I do also have an Avalanche 1 certificate, and I'm actually designing a class for Central Oregon Community College this fall or winter on how to stay comfortable with cold weather hiking. So if you're interested in that, more to come as that course comes along. But I also ski a lot. So I cross-country ski, skate ski, downhill ski, and backcountry ski. But I didn't do any of that on my first big hike in 2006 when it was a really high snow year. So I entered the Sierra on June 14th and had significant snow all the way through Sonora Pass and beyond. I did not know much about snow travel then, but I traveled with a great group of people and really learned a lot during that time. So then the next really big hike I took was the Continental Divide Trail in 2015. And by that time I had started skiing, and I had a lot of friends who had hiked the CDT, and I had heard fear-mongering, or maybe truth, some nightmare stories about post-holing through the snow, and especially in the South San Juans. So by that time, like I said, I had taken Avalanche 1, I had skied a lot, so I felt more comfortable with the idea of trying to ski it instead of post-hole it. So my partner made me some shoe bindings for some touring skis that we had, some lightweight touring skis, so I could wear my hiking shoes. And it worked great on long straight sections where you're up on some of the mesas and the South San Juans, but really the weakest part of that whole setup were my ankles, because I was wearing low top trail shoes and my heavy pack. So I was really making cautious decisions about how I skied, where I skied in the terrain. So all in all, I skied about 40 miles and sent my skis home in Lake City, even though I still had plenty of snow ahead. But I was pretty happy with my decision. And yeah, happy to dive into more of that later, but I'll pass it on.
So I'm Drop and Roll, and I hiked the PCT in 2011, CDT 2013. I've done the Hayduke, Oregon Desert Trail, Idaho Centennial Trail, and a bunch of those high routes that Giggles mentioned. Yeah, the PCT was my big snow year, 2011. It was kind of an unusual year in that it was a big snow year in the winter, but not that huge. But the spring was really cool and wet, and the melt just didn't happen. So the amount of actual snow on the ground ended up being really high compared to other years at the time that hikers were going through. And nowadays I do a lot of mountaineering here in the Pacific Northwest. And I've done a lot of backcountry skiing and mountaineering. But at the time I hiked the PCT, I had done none of that. I'd really had no backcountry experience, even in hiking at that point. I did take a snow skills class in New England before going on the PCT to learn how to use an ice axe, which was good because I had really never been on snow before at all. So that was good. I'm glad I did that. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Drop and Roll. And I love hearing your story because I feel like it is so descriptive of many hikers going on their first through hike, where maybe they haven't been on snow before, they haven't been on backpacking trips before. And in a big snow year, taking the time to take a weekend class locally. I think you were living on the East Coast at the time, and to be able to practice a little bit with people who can train you as professionals is a really, really good idea, I think. Shira, I have a question for you. I know a lot of the big questions right now and concerns that thru hikers might have are about steep snow, icy slopes. That one section on Forester Pass that comes to mind, Glen Pass. What sort of tips or more useful idea might be resources do you have? Do you recommend for that kind of travel?
Yeah, well, maybe it's a downside, but sometimes an upside of there being no trail. The trail is gone, so you can go where you want to go. So sometimes, you know, we found hiking some of those PCT passes that it was easiest to just go straight up rather than make the many switchbacks, because then you're just prolonging your exposure on that steep slope. So if you go straight up, you can use, you know, if you have an ice axe, I'd highly recommend, or a hiking pole, you drive it into the snow. So you anchor it into the snow before you take your steps. So you want at least 1 to 2 points of contact at all times. So you put your ice axe or your pole, and then you make a step, and we call them kick steps. So you'll kick your foot into the slope and try to make a level platform. And so it's easier if you are on like a little bit of softer snow. So if you can time your hike up something like Pinchot Pass to when the sun is on it a little bit, you can kick steps in. And even if there are people ahead of you and they're already kick steps, the people behind you will really appreciate, as things melt out, as the sun hits it, to again kick 1 or 2, maybe even 3 times. You have your ice axe planted, you kick, and then you step, and then you take a rest. It's kind of a rest step. So you go slow to go fast. So you take your time. It's hard to go straight up the slope, but rather than, you know, that side slope. So if you do find yourself you're hiking on a slide slope, you would use your ice axe or your hiking pole on the uphill side. So my slope is to my left, I will use that. And again, I will anchor before I step, so that if something were to happen and you were to fall, and I would highly recommend everyone learn how to self-arrest. If you do end up sliding out, how can you stop yourself with, you know, and sometimes you can stop yourself with a hiking pole, but again, if you have an ice axe, that's preferable. So yeah, again, no trail, go where you want to go. Go with the efficient line, and slow and steady, like take your time up these slopes. And then a note about icy slopes. So I mentioned, you know, it's really worth waiting if you can, or timing your travel on some of these steep passes, these steep sections, to when it's not icy. So first thing in the morning, it's going to be hard to get a footprint in. Definitely recommend on some of those conditions, crampons or micro spikes, but even micro spikes on an icy slope is not really going to do a whole lot. So you want either really good crampons with those points on the toe where you can kick that in, and it's really just the points that are holding you, or wait and time your travel to when it's a little bit softer, so it has a chance to warm up. The mashed potato slopes suck too, but they're safer than icy slopes. So that's what I'd say on that.
Thank you for that. Are there specific classes? And I guess another question is, and maybe this should have been the opening for everyone, is would you recommend going with a group?
Definitely. Yeah. Groups. I mean, there's safety in numbers, especially like I mentioned on the PCT in 06, I hadn't had a lot of snow travel experience. And so traveling with those more experienced was a game-changing experience. I learned a lot. I kept myself safe, and we were able to look out for each other. So if someone did happen to go sliding, you know, we could go help. Fortunately, that didn't happen. But yes, traveling in groups is a really good idea. And I did see my friend Joe just put in the comments, like your ice axe in your uphill hand and your hiking pole in your downhill hand. And like the more anchors you can have to the snow, like if you do slip, you have those two poles, those two anchors. So maybe you can keep yourself in place and not slide down the slope.
Thank you so much. Drop and roll. For those who hopped on a little bit early, you might have seen a few video shorts of Fords from Drop and Roll's hike in 2011 on the PCT. And in 2011, the Fords and the river crossings were definitely a challenge. What tips do you have for some of these river crossings and fords?
The river fords were definitely the most intimidating and scary part of my hike for me. The snow, was its own challenge, but the river fords are what felt dangerous. And my number one tip would be to know that you don't have to cross the river where the trail crosses. Most of the time, you can find something better not at the trail crossing. So you may have to scout up or downstream pretty far. Maybe you're going even a whole mile up or downstream or more, and it can be very slow and take a lot of time. But it's totally worth it if you can find yourself a safer place to cross, or a lot of times you can find a log across a down tree. You want to make sure it goes all the way across and isn't something that's going to flex and be bendy on one end. But that can be really helpful. You'll get good at crossing on logs. Even if it seems a little scary at first, it ends up feeling much more secure than being in some of those scary rivers. I guess another point is that time of day, as Shira mentioned with the snow softness, time of day is also critical in river crossings. So you get a diurnal flow where melt that happens during the day swells up the rivers, so that by the end of the day, they're going to be at their highest and they're going to be at their lowest first thing in the morning. So if you get to something and think, I can't cross this, just stop and camp for the night and you will be amazed at how much lower it is in the morning. I actually had that experience in a very scary crossing for me, where I went for an unintended swim, saw my life flash before my eyes, thought I was going to die, got across. The rest of my group was behind me, and they spent like probably a whole hour scouting for some other place to cross. They managed to get across with a planned swim in a slower moving section, but it was just a really traumatizing experience for all of us. So we camped on the bank as soon as we all got back together. The next morning, as we were packing up camp, a couple other hikers came across. They were only wet up to their knees. If we had just waited to camp on the other side and waited till the morning, none of us would have gone through that traumatic experience. So definitely something to keep in mind is just waiting for the time and making sure you have enough food to be able to wait out times like that.
Yeah, I really liked how you talked about carrying extra food, because it is slower. Sometimes scouting out, getting across a river, if there were no river there, you would most hikers would cover that ground of whatever the length of the river is in 30 seconds. But it can take an hour. It can take camping and calling it a day at 2 p.m. or something. As a through hiker, stopping and hiking is very difficult for me before the day is over. It's very frustrating. So I think, normalizing this idea of it's okay to wait, it's okay to camp here. Many of you know that Naomi and I, who founded Treeline Review together, also were hiking partners together. And we had instances on the Pacific Northwest Trail and definitely on the Great Divide Trail in the Canadian Rockies where we had to wait. And when we woke up the next morning, we couldn't, it was like a whole different river.
Yeah, I guess my last thing to talk about is just also sticking with other people. There's a lot of strategies on crossing as teams, like with arms linked together and things like that. You can look up videos online for different strategies. What I think some of that's a matter of personal preference and how well you know each other, how well you're going to work in sync, if that's a good idea or not. But having somebody else there to help you if you do take a swim and maybe you lose your gear or something, that can be really critical to have somebody else there.
Thank you, Drop and Roll. Giggles, we've talked a lot about how important it is to go with a group. But one of the dangers, of course, is groupthink. Can you tell us a little bit about what groupthink is and what you think people should know about it as they're choosing members of who they're going to go into the Sierra or the San Juans or whatever their high snow year area will be?
Yeah. So groupthink is this idea that like we don't want to upset the group. So someone might actually have a different thought, but not want to bring it up for fear of causing an uncomfortable situation or upsetting people. And so sometimes it's one person who agrees to do something they didn't really want to do. Other times it's an entire group just not having a full-on discussion because they don't want to talk about the uncomfortable things, and then they make a bad decision. And this is often not done super consciously. It's just kind of everyone's like, oh yeah, like sounds good, let's go. And just trying to keep like the vibes good. So yeah, definitely can happen to anyone. I think for me, like a big step is being aware that this can happen. So if you know, oh, hey, like there's this kind of social psychology element here, this like soft skill that is present can help you already start to work through that. I think checking in with yourself. Some people tend to speak up, like me, luckily for myself, I tend to be someone that speaks up. If you are someone that speaks up, you need to be sure that you're listening to everyone else. If you realize that, oh, hey, I'm someone who doesn't usually speak up, that's a time for you to be like practicing your no and like starting to learn to speak up. You can even tell your group, like if you're at Kennedy Meadows hanging out, you can say like, hey, I just want you to know I have trouble in group settings, like voicing a no. And then you can have hiking partners kind of help you with that. Some other elements that are really good are having like just a non-judgmental group brainstorm of what could possibly go wrong. So you're all trying to think of any possibility of things that could go wrong. Because then there's no judgment. It's just like anything you can think of. And then also having a turn for each person to say like, okay, I feel good about this. I feel nervous about this. I'm on the fence about it. So that you know, like, does more discussion need to happen, or are you ready to go? And then having decided before you leave for the snowy area, how do you make a decision? So like in Avalanche courses, we usually talk about sticking with the most conservative choice. So if someone, once you've all decided to travel together, if someone is a no, we usually respect that no. You can have further discussions, but if there's a no, you wait until everyone feels good. So having some sort of agreed upon decision-making process can also really help with combating groupthink. Remember, groupthink can even happen with footprints. If you see some footprints and you're like, someone's done that. Like this happens to me all the time. I'm like, well, somebody did it. That is also important to remember, that just because someone else did it doesn't mean they did it the day you're doing it, with the gear you're doing it with the same skills you're doing it with. So remember that you have to make your own choices that you and your group feel good with.
Thank you for that, Giggles. Can you tell me a little bit before we go into the next section about choosing partners to go with, sort of the dimensions with your trail family, your tramily, and deciding how long to stick together and in what sort of conditions to stick together?
I think a thing that people don't talk about that much is this can actually be like pretty emotional. Like if you do want to make a different choice in your group, that can be really hard. And speaking it can be hard, and then doing it can be hard. When you're picking partners, I think it's important to have the hard discussions in town before you leave. So again, like figuring out how you're going to make decisions, how you're going to structure your discussions so that everyone's voice is heard. I think it does help to share what your skills are, and share kind of what your risk tolerances are. And like, I think Shira touched on this, like having a range is good, but you want to be sure that the range isn't so drastic that like some people are always holding the group back, or some people are always pushing the group to do things that they're not comfortable with. So enough range that you can learn from each other and keep each other safe is really good, but just being sure that it's within a range that works together. And usually you do want to commit to whatever stretch you're traveling together for, so that someone is not then stuck alone. So if you need to kind of break up, be sure that that's done in like an intentional way, where there's either another group the person can join, or you're in a town or something like that. And you can kind of make it work for stretches where it's a little more uncomfortable, just to keep everyone safe. That's super important. Yeah, and another thing we talk about in Avalanche too is like mixed gender groups tend to make better decisions. There's a little less machismo there, and it can help to have different opinions be voiced. So
That's really helpful, Giggles. And I think especially in a big snow year, having those discussions in Kennedy Meadows, in Chama if you're on the CDT, or even before Chama, because you'll probably hit snow on the way to Chama, with your group, and really voicing each other's your skill sets beforehand can be very, very helpful. And I also went out on the CDT in the San Juans the year she was there, to join a friend, which kind of makes no sense why I would join a friend in the most difficult part, but I decided to. And those were some of the conversations that we had about what sort of skill sets, what certifications, who was a mountaineering guide, and the sort of commitment that we made that we would all stick together for that first 100 miles and then reassess whether we would stick together as a group. And ultimately, the group broke into multiple parts after that first 100 miles, but having that commitment that we wouldn't leave anyone behind was really important. All right, so for this next section, if I'd like to ask all of you your thoughts on these. So we talked about steep snow, we talked about fords, and those are the two big dangers that should be on thru-hikers' minds as they go out. What is one other thing that maybe isn't talked about as much about hiking in a big snow year that you think people need to know about?
I think one maybe misconception is that the snow is just in the Sierra, and it's not usually the case. That's definitely not the case this year. I know the year I hiked, it was a heavy snow year in the entire West Coast. So the Sierra and the Cascades, I was still hitting patches of snow in Washington in September. There was still a frozen lake in Washington in September. And just knowing that, it's going to go on for quite a while, and it can be kind of draining both physically and mentally, just to be on snow and spending so much mental energy navigating through all of that. So it's just kind of something to think about, and be prepared for mentally.
Thank you. And I know one thing that we had talked about is wet feet and flooded trail as well. Do you want to, sorry if that was what Giggles and Shira were going to talk about, but Pop and Roll and I have talked about that a lot.
Oh yeah. I could not believe like how much time my feet were, we had a joke that it was a rule of the trail that it's not time to camp until your feet are wet, because it seemed inevitably every single day my feet were wet by the time we got to camp. Even days that we didn't think we were going to be on snow, there ended up being flooded sections of trail that you felt like you were walking through a pond.
Thank you for sharing that. Giggles, what about you?
Yeah, so someone just put in the chat avalanche concerns, which definitely, if that is present on your trail that particular time, for sure. But I think kind of some less expected ones I would say would be summit fever is one I wanted to touch on. So this is kind of similar, a psychological thing, just like groupthink. Summit fever really tends to get me. Summit fever is basically where you have a goal. So maybe that's a summit, maybe that is long distance hiking a certain trail. And you get so excited about the goal that it kind of clouds your decision-making process. And often the closer that you get to completing the goal, the harder it is to decide not to go. So I have definitely encountered this a few times. I summited the highest peak in Utah when it looked like there could be a storm, and there was a storm, and that was not a wise choice. I've also gotten to the final trail to go up Mount Whitney and looked like the sky was purple, and I had to decide to go down 2,000 feet, and that was like so heartbreaking, but it was the right choice. So it is something that can kind of trip you up. This is important to remember when you're doing river crossings, because sometimes you're like, oh, I just want to get to the next town, I'm going north, and just remembering that like you can be so fixated on that goal that you might not really be looking at the river. And then following boot pack, like I talked about too. So being sure that you're not just following someone's ambitious line that they took 2 weeks before you, that you're actually like assessing the concerns. And then, yeah, I think Gus was saying in the chat, avalanche concerns for sure. Being sure you're checking the reports is gonna be a big one.
That's true, especially for CDT hikers this year. And also boot pack, when I hiked the PCT, admittedly, it was before Gut Hook, but I followed some boot pack and found myself on the wrong pass. Look, I had to turn around. So I don't recommend following boot pack just because someone else did it. Shira, what is one thing that you think maybe isn't talked about as much as it should be?
I would say sleeping on the snow. So a lot of folks, so I encountered this more on the CDT. Folks had never camped on the snow and just didn't understand or realize how much that snow is going to seep or steal your warmth. So you have to have protection between you and the snow. And so that is probably carrying 2 sleeping pads, which you will be so grateful for. Even like, so I purposely camp on snow a lot, but I carry a very thinsulite pad. So like an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch, even that much underneath your Neo Air. I really like sleeping on air, but giving yourself that extra barrier is going to save you. You're not going to sleep well if you try to just sleep on your air mattress or what you're used to on the ground. So and then if you're not sleeping well, you're exhausted for the real work of hiking. So I would say pay attention to your sleeping system. And also with that, it's like, think about your shelter, setting up your shelter on snow. And so maybe this will come up later, but I think a freestanding tent, if you know you're going to be on snow, is like such an easy solution. You don't have to worry about anything. Your body weight and your pack weight is going to weight that shelter down, or figure out strategies for using your tent stakes in the snow. So what you can do is put them parallel, lay them out flat, and then stomp snow on top of it. And if it's the right kind of snow, sticky snow, or even maybe pour a little water, which you might have to pour warm water on it in the morning to get them out, but learn how to set up your shelter in snow or just take a freestanding tent. Those would be my suggestions.
That's excellent, Shira. And it's actually a bit of a segue, because the next question is, what are some gear items that you think are worth carrying in a big snow year? And one thing I was also going to mention that it's snow stakes. Would you recommend carrying those if someone has, for example, a Z-Pax duplex?
Yeah, and again, like there's a lot of different types of snow and snow consistency, but I think, yeah, snow stake, and I'm not totally familiar with that Z-Pax, but the one snow stakes I've used, they're basically a square of sil nylon, and you put like a snowball in it and you stomp it into the ground. Yeah, that would be a great idea. The one thing that came to mind, especially when y'all were talking about wet feet, I don't hike without GoreTex socks anymore. And so I hike through marshes. I can hike with wet shoes in the morning, with cold frozen shoes, but you put your socks on and they're a very thin GoreTex layer you put on over your socks. And as long as you're not stepping in water that covers the seam or the edge of the sock, it will keep your foot infinitely drier. Granted, your feet will sweat a little bit, but like 5-10 minutes on a break, I take them off, dry them out, put them back on. I have pictures on the CDT where I'm full on like mid shin deep and my feet were completely dry. So that is like the secret that I don't see or hear a lot of hikers talking about, but GoreTex sock, more than neoprene. I know a lot of people love their neoprene. I say GoreTex over neoprene.
Thank you for that, Shira. And yes, waterproof socks, whether you go GoreTex or neoprene, really was a game changer for me. On the PCT, my feet were so cold and wet that it was really hard. They were almost painful. It was so hard for me to focus. And once I switched over to, not the first time on the CDT, the second time, I finally got the memo, and it was a total game changer. And I also switched to waterproof shoes, because why not, for that section? They helped keep my feet warm. Giggles, do you want to go next for the gear items that you think are worth carrying in a big snow year?
Sure. Ice axe would be my number one. I know a lot of people are really pro trekking pole, but there are some slopes where you can't get enough purchase with a trekking pole. Also, like what Shira was talking about at the very, very beginning about snow consistencies. There's certain snow consistencies where you can improvise a self-arrest, and there's certain ones where you cannot. And you would like to not crash into boulders in all snow consistencies. So having an ice axe is really, really key. And then I guess I'll just share some weird ones that I do. So I wear a nose guard. It's like a little thing that you can put over your nose that goes on your sunglasses. It's definitely like mountaineering world. But I sunburn really, really easily. And for me, that has been pretty crucial. When I was doing the Sierra high route, I got into town at the Bishop Hostel, and my nose was so sunburnt that everyone there was so concerned for me. They built me a nose guard out of duct tape. So I've now upgraded to a actual nose guard that attaches to my sunglasses. I also have Raynaud's, which is where your fingers stop circulating at certain temperatures. And it doesn't have to be very cold. And that can be really, really challenging when you're doing a thru hike where you're getting into colder temperatures. And so I've come up with a system that's kind of working. I usually bring hand warmers just because you can't generate your own heat once the syndrome kicks in your fingertips. So I carry some hand warmers as an emergency thing. I have like some fleece gloves, and then I have these ice fishing bad boys they're waterproof ice fishing gloves. They're insulated. And I can put them on over the fleece gloves. I often leave the fleece gloves for camp and use these when I'm hiking. They're completely waterproof, so you might get some sweating. They also have grip, which is great for some things and not good for touching your face. These I brought on the CDT, and they were a total game changer for me for my fingers. So strange, not aesthetic, but great.
Thank you so much, Giggles. And I really appreciate you talking about sun care, the extra glare from the snow. When I hiked the PCT, there was a guy who didn't bring any sunscreen in the Sierra and turned the color of your shirt. It was very, very disconcerting, and actually had to get treated, I think, for some blisters on his face. He's fine now. And I also know someone else who went into the Sierra without sunglasses and also had similar issues with being able to see. So sun care is especially important. You think you need it for the desert, you really, really need it for when you're going to get to the snow.
Can I touch on the sunglasses really quick?
Yes.
So one thing that some groups considered doing is bringing one extra pair of sunglasses. So we had someone in our group who got swept and lost his sunglasses, which, considering the monstrosity of the things he got swept down, that was not a big deal. But then we were stuck with many, many miles of snow travel. And so we actually had to alter our path, like completely leaving the trail to find as much dry land as possible. We changed the time of day that we were hiking. It is really, really important to protect your eyes. And so if you do have one extra pair of sunglasses in your group, since they are something that tends to get misplaced, that can be huge.
Thank you for that, Giggles. And drop and roll. Some gear items you think are worth carrying in a big snow year?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the ice axe for sure, as everyone else has mentioned. Micro spikes are very helpful. As Shira said, they're not always going to be effective on a super icy slopes, but they make a huge difference. I did not have them when I hiked in the PCT. I think we talk about fear mongering. I thought all the talk about snow was just fear mongering, and by the time I get these micro spikes ordered and sent to me, we're going to be out of the snow. So I didn't get them, and then there was more and more and more snow. And I really should have had them. Everyone else who had them was way faster and more steady on all the slopes than I was, and I just would have made things a lot better. And then definitely sun protection. I think even just long pants and long sleeves, like a full hat. The more coverage you can get, like sunscreen only works so much, and it's a lot to have to carry and put on all the time. I would go for just full coverage protection. The reflection off the snow is just brutal. And then another one that hasn't been mentioned, just having a set of dry clothes and dry socks always with you. I know some people don't carry like dedicated sleep clothes and just wear their hiking clothes to bed, but you're going to be wet so much of the time and normally. And then of course, there's always the chance of an unexpected dunking in water. It's just really important to be able to get warm again, to be able to get out of those wet clothes and have something dry to put on.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned the dry clothes, because one of the photos that you shared was you trying to dry yourself out after getting swept away in a river ford. And I think having, if there's ever a time to have backups on gear, even as an ultralight backpacker, it's during these times. And one piece of gear that wasn't mentioned that I would like to give a shout out for is a stove. I know many people who I have an ultralight friend who was stoveless, went into San Juan's and wasn't able to find any water because all the water sources, all the springs were under the snow. So it's really useful to have that stove, not just to improve your morale at the end of the day, but just to be able to drink water at the end of the day. So one last question for everyone. What's one thing you wish you had done differently during your big snow year? And drop and roll, since you went last time, I'll let you go first.
So one of my things that I learned while on trail that I changed as I was doing it was just to carry more calories. You're moving slower, and also just being on snow all day is exhausting. You're just going to end up burning a lot more calories. When I left Kearsarge Pass, I was planning to go all the way to Mammoth as an 8-day leg without stopping in between. I think there's one option to go to VVR, but we didn't want to take the time or cost to go out there. So I was carrying 8 days of food, but it's also in the Sierra where you're required to fit your food in a bear can. So I had the large Bear Vault 500, and when I left town, I made sure all of my food fit in that bear can. And it is impossible to get enough calories for 8 days in a bear can, even the large size one. And okay, I didn't tell you this, but there's no bears up there when there's that much snow. So don't worry about getting all your food in your bear can to start. Pack enough that you can actually survive, and you'll get most of it in the bear can after a day or two.
Treeline Review does not endorse and is not liable or responsible for any decisions you might have heard related to what our panelists say.
Yeah, I lost about 10 pounds in that 8 days. Like, we made it in 8 days, but I was rationing the entire time. I was constantly hungry, and it was not a good experience.
Shira.
Yeah, I would say for me on the PCT I mentioned at the beginning, I didn't really have experience, but what helped a lot was traveling with people who knew how to read a topo map. So like I said, the trail is gone. You have no idea where the trail is. So to be able to look at your map and know which pass you need to go up and how to get there efficiently is super important. And then when I got on the CDT, I had a lot more experience with reading topo maps. And I had also decided that I'm going to make smart decisions, and that is sometimes not staying on the trail corridor, especially the Continental Divide Trail when it's up on the divide. Like, it goes through avalanche terrain, and there were hikers in front of me triggering avalanches. And so I often made decisions like, okay, I'm gonna find a way around. I could look at the map and see, this is a dangerous section. It's steep. The slope is steep. I'm going to find a way around. So I would use Gaia GPS. I would download the whole area between one town and the next. And then I would, in my tent at night, be like, okay, I don't like the look of this section. How can I get around? And I would drop waypoints like breadcrumbs for myself. It's like, okay, I could get safely around by doing this. And I did that continuously. And I'm one who likes to connect my footprints, but especially in 2015, and most years on the CDT and the San Juans, you are not going to be on the trail all the time. So you kind of have to get away from that tourist mindset for your own safety. So being able to follow a line on something like Far Out or Guide GPS, sure, that's great. But can you look at your phone or the surrounding terrain and know what's safe? So you need to be able to look when the trail is gone, when it's not safe. You need to be able to look at the map, the topo map, and be able to tell what is safe for you to travel. So learn to read the topo map. That's my soapbox.
That's really great. And it's a bit of a follow-up. Would you recommend that especially for these sections, carrying paper maps, downloading big wide sections onto your phone? What sort of preparation would you have in terms of maps and maybe knowing about exit points in case something goes wrong?
Now, so I started hiking before GPSs and smartphones, and now I carry everything. I carry paper, I carry technology. I broke my phone before trauma, right as I got a text message like, don't cross this river alone. And I was alone. And I was like, oh God. So like, luckily I had downloaded the maps because I didn't, it was spotty cell reception. So yes, I always take paper. And, you know, back in the day, CDT hikers used to rip out pages of the Gazetteer or the Delorme maps because that's all there was. And then you have a really big overview. But now with smartphone apps, you know, you can, like, for example, between Trauma and Wolf Creek Pass, I downloaded that whole area. And I think it was, I forget the name of the pass, it was something with an E. But it was like, no, this isn't safe. I decided to hike around, and the hikers that are like, it's good, we'll keep going. They like were scared, so scared. And I saw them as they bailed down, and they were like, we should have listened to you. You have experience. But it's like sort of that groupthink, and that also like, I'm going to let the goal take precedence over safety. And that can get you into trouble. You have to like stop and think and look at the terrain before you get there. And yes, exit points, like if you can identify when you're in town, like if you're in trauma, what are the sections of trail that could be problems? And if you have time, like I waited 5-6 days in trauma because it was still snowing. It would snow between the time I left Mexico and got to trauma, it had snowed 10 feet. So it's like, it was fresh snow, which is different than consolidated snow, which is easier to travel on, which is not going to slide as easily. Yeah, so carry paper, carry digital, do all the things, take all the things, because it will happen. If it hasn't, it probably will at some point.
Thank you so much for that, Shira. Giggles.
I just want to echo Shira before I move on. I just like so important. I also, whenever there's a snowy section or a high fire section, I always bring paper maps. I've been in groups where even we'll order a map that we're only planning on using in town for like big picture. So sometimes that can be helpful too. But I always carry paper maps, and I always download multiple online or app maps. I highly recommend playing with Cal Topo. Like right now, after this, go play with Cal Topo. It'll teach you so much about different things. Like you can learn about the slope angles, you can learn about the amount of snow, you can learn more about reading maps. It's a really great resource for kind of learning a little bit more about maps. I think for me, my own personal big thing that I did wrong or regret or would change is like I traveled 200 miles on snow. Everything was great. And I got to Sonora Pass, and we were almost done with like the snow part. And I was crossing a very short section of snow, like probably about like 8 footsteps or something, like not very large, or maybe a little bigger than that, but not huge. And I looked down to check the run out, which you should always do when you're crossing on a slope. And the run out was boulders, which is not a good run out. But I decided, 200 miles on snow, I was good to go. It was just a few steps. And so I didn't take out my ice axe. And the second that I got my second foot on the snow, I fell. And the snow was a consistency where I was unable to makeshift self-arrest, and I didn't have my ice axe out. And I got incredibly lucky there. And that was just like a very humbling moment that like, it doesn't matter how small the snow patch is. If the run out is bad, you should take out your ice axe, because as soon as you have 2 feet on snow, if there's a boulder field below you, you need to be able to stop. And that's something that I've taken with me when I went on to the CDT. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Giggles. There's an old sort of mountaineering joke is not the word I'm looking for, but the people that they find have their ice axe still strapped onto their back. So it's not enough to just carry it with you. You have to take it out. And another question, kind of following up on what you all have talked about, is about resources that you would use to check about conditions, and whether or not, I know we talked about phone failures, whether or not you would recommend carrying a satellite messenger, which actually wasn't one of the gear pieces that was mentioned in what gear would you carry. but is that something that you would use to either communicate with others back home in case of an emergency, or even friends that you know who are ahead of you who might be able to tell you, as happened with Shira, don't cross this river alone?
I'll jump in. Yes, I carried an InReach satellite beacon on the CDT, and now I do for all my hikes. It's like, if it's available, if it's 100% global coverage, why wouldn't you? And so even beyond the communicating and getting, touching base is weather reports. So you can get a localized weather report exactly where you are, which is a game changer. So if you're in this storm cycle and you're wondering, should I go over that 12 or 13,000 foot pass? It depends on, what's going to happen tomorrow. So being able to get a weather report on your satellite beacon is fabulous. And yes, so when my phone broke, I was able to text, my folks at home and say, can you order me a new phone and have it sent to trauma? And because I had paper maps, so I could keep going, but I kept getting lost and turned around, and it turned out I got lost where the hiker Otto unfortunately passed away south of Chama. So I found myself like at that rest area. That was like, anyway, so I hiked around, I hiked roads because there were a lot of blowdowns. I couldn't find the trail. There was snow. I was alone. A lot of reasons. And I felt like, am I failing at, because I'm not going through and doing like the hardcore thing? But you have to let that go. Like, you surviving is the most important thing. Like, so you didn't take the high route or whatever, but you made it through and you lived to hike another day. That's what's important.
That was great, Shira. And it reminds me, Scout and Frodo released a video yesterday about their thoughts on hiking in a big snow year. And Frodo said something really beautiful that is very much so kind of that summit fever. Canada is optional. Coming out alive is not. So that really helps put your decisions into perspective. Giggles or Drop and Roll, any other thoughts on satellite transmitters, maps?
Yeah, I definitely suggest a satellite transmitter. Like in the courses that I teach, like we learn how to respond to emergencies, and there are a lot of medical emergencies that you can stabilize on your own. There are some that you can stabilize until help comes, and there are just some that you can't. And that's just kind of the reality of it. And like maybe help would come in time, maybe it wouldn't, but like it's definitely not getting there if you have no way of getting it. So I think like in terms of like emergency, it's really, really important. And it increases the safety of everyone around you as well as yourself, especially if you're alone. I also use it like Shira does. I happen to have a dad who's like so good at tracking conditions that like sometimes he'll be like, oh, did you know this is happening next? And I'm like, what? And so that can be helpful if he randomly is like, hey, here's a new snow report. In addition to the programmed weather reports. But my girlfriend and I definitely waited out a whole storm system on the Wind River High Route just because we were watching the weather reports come in, and we spent a whole day in the tent. So definitely really, really helpful on that. And I would also put a plug for, if it is not safe according to you for your risk assessment, flip or wait or skip. Like, that's okay. And it is so heartbreaking, and it's also totally okay. It is so hard to make that choice, and it's sometimes a choice that you have to make, and that can totally be the right choice for you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Giggles. Very important to normalize. Do the safe thing. Drop and roll.
Yeah, I don't think I really have anything different to add. I didn't have GPS or a satellite, messenger when I hiked the PCT, but they're available now, and I would absolutely take them. Certainly, they're not a guarantee that you're going to get you out of a bad situation, but as Giggle said, it's definitely not going to get out of it without them. So yeah, make use of all the resources available to you.
Right. And one of those resources too that's available now is in the Far Out app. As I'm sure many of you know, there's a comment section. So you can track what people who are ahead of you say about a certain ford. Oftentimes I'll see comments like, I'm 5'10", came up to my chest at 3 p.m. And that can be a really good way to help gauge, should I go through that? Should I try to find an alternative? Should I go around this? Should I skip this section? So
I would like to give a caution to that, however. Conditions can change really quickly. So just because it was safe for someone else doesn't mean it's going to be safe for you. And the other way around, just because somebody else decided it was not safe for them doesn't mean it would not be okay for you. So I think the best thing you can do is to trust your own judgment when you get to something, and evaluate, is this appropriate for me at this time?
If you do want to collect information though, like I do think that it can be one valuable tool. I think Snorkel asked this and we didn't really get to it, but you can also check Postholer often has information. And then CalTopo, sorry, I really like CalTopo, also has like Snowtel monitoring sites, and that'll give you information. So those are some things. If you compile like Postholer and the Snowtel monitors, and like you can call rangers, or like what people ahead of you are saying on Instagram and gut hooks, and you compile it all together to kind of create a picture, and then you get the weather reports and the avalanche reports. You're checking like about 6 sources to kind of have a picture. And then when you get there, like Drop and Roll said, you still have to deal with what the heck is there. But it can help you decide if it even makes sense to go in, or if it makes sense to wait a bit. And you do need to know about weather, avalanche, so like snow consistency and avalanche, snow levels, and then water levels. And those are all things that you can start to get data before you even get in there.
Thanks, Giggles. And we will share a link for that. And also a plug today, Giggles' story on tips for through hiking in a high snow year is live on Treeline Review. So be sure to give that a look. It goes into a lot of details. We're right at 6 o'clock, and I know that we have lots of questions. So I do want to allow people who have to go right now to hop off if that's the case. And if not, I will let Naomi take over for questions.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of questions about GoreTex socks. What kind would you recommend? There's one question just came in. Can you use GoreTex socks while doing water crossings, or would that be pointless? Anybody have any thoughts on favorite socks, when you would actually use them?
Yeah, I can weigh in. So take the GoreTex socks off when you're doing a crossing, because unless they're, actually I've seen knee-high ones, but most likely you're going to be in crossing water that's at least knee-high, if not higher. So they will just fill with water and then be a hazard because they're dragging you down because they're full of water. So I would take them off for any crossings, but then you'll have nice, warm, dry socks. So I would even take off your hiking socks, the GoreTex socks, cross in your sneakers, because you don't want to, you want that traction. You'll slip easy on bare feet, or you might cut your feet open. And then when you get to the other side, dry off your feet, put on your dry socks and put on your GoreTex socks, and you will be totally comfortable on the other side. And so the question of brand, so I'm someone who like uses my gear until it falls apart. So I have like a pair of Cabela's GoreTex socks that are probably like 15 years old that I keep like seam sealing. But folks I know have used the Rocky brand and the Gore brand. So there might be more brands out there I'm not aware of. I probably should replace my really old pair. But yeah, it's, I think, don't walk in water that's over the hemline, because they'll just fill and then you're not going to be happy. Then your feet will be wet.
Cool, good advice. A couple more questions about stream crossings. What time would you say first thing in the morning, like 5 or 6 o'clock? And do you have any cross tips first if you're hiking solo? What do you do?
Yeah, I think for the first thing in the morning, you know, you've got a window. It's not like, oh, you have to hit in exactly this 15 minutes or something like that. But I would, you know, first thing after it's light out in the morning is probably a good time. You don't want to be crossing in the dark. And then for solo, just being, you know, I mean, avoid it if you can. It's like, if you're on the PCT or something, there's going to be so many people around you. Really just try to group up with other people for that part, even if your goal overall is a solo hike. That's not the best time. Some other things, just hazards to look for, like making sure that you can. There are a lot of information about this online. Just like making sure you're upstream, not upstream of like a strainer, so that if you don't get like trapped under a tree that's submerged or something like that. being really, really cautious about where you're crossing.
If you have a communication device and you do decide to do something sketchy and you're alone, you can message someone at home and tell them that you're about to do that. And if you have a tracking device, you can increase the rate of tracking, and then that person can know whether or not you're moving or you're no longer moving. Not a good strategy to use as your first line of defense. I 100% would suggest just waiting for other people. The 2 hikers that we lost my year, I believe, were both solo river crossings. So please wait. But even if you're doing a snowy slope that's really, really sketchy and you have someone at home, you can increase your tracking interval to 10 minutes, leave it on, and at least someone knows what's happened to you.
Okay. Regarding the CDT and high snow, are snowshoes useful? I've seen mixed reports. Has anybody here used snowshoes?
So I mentioned I skied, but I I left Chama Wolf Creek Pass with someone with snowshoes. And so the report back, everyone was super jealous of the skis. So I was just gliding along. And people who were post-holing were super jealous of the snowshoers. So yes, snowshoes are better than nothing.
I had the exact same experience as Shira. Everyone was jealous of the skis, but the snowshoes were good.
Okay, could you talk more about your experience skiing a portion of the trail? Would you consider doing that this year on the PCT? How would you go about making that call, and what would the considerations be?
So I would do it differently, and I actually talked a lot with Giggles before her CDT hike because she was interested in skiing as well. And like I mentioned at the beginning, the weakest part in my setup were my ankles because I was not wearing plastic ski boots. I did not have ankle protection. But Giggles, I think you did carry actual ski boots. So that would be something I would do differently. Again, I don't know, it was different because the CDT, I had a lot of fresh snow. So it was fresh snow still falling. The PCT, it was spring consolidated snow. I would not have skied the PCT leaving mid-June because it was all snow cupped and it was fairly consolidated. But if you had a lot of fresh snow, perhaps. So I'm friends with Pepper and Trauma who skied the Pacific Crest Trail a few years ago, but in winter. And I think their reviews are mixed as well because they had a really late winter. So they were like walking and they had wet feet and they couldn't ski as much as they had hoped. And again, like a lot of the slopes are not appropriate for skiing necessarily. So I don't necessarily know that the PCT is the right place for skiing. Giggles, what do you think?
So I got ski boots, so like a step up, but I fit them looser than I would have because of all the like walking. And I think since I had my trail runners with me, I would go for a more normal fit if I were to do it again, instead of leaving a little bit of room for like foot swelling and stuff like that. And then, so I skied the last end of New Mexico, and it was patchy enough that we were carrying our skis for a lot of it, and not all of the slopes worked well for skiing. So in the moments where it was good, it worked really well. But I definitely also think I would have the similar concerns about the PCT. Like there were tons of sun cups when we were there, like the whole way. And then if you did have to carry your skis, it does affect your balance. So you have to think about river crossings, which are not really as big of a thing on the CDT because you're crossing at the divide. And so how are you going to negotiate your log balances and your swims with these giant skis? And then also if you are doing like a boot pack along a ridge, you want to have your ice axe out and you're going to have skis strapped to your pack or you're going to be skiing depending on the ridge. So I would worry about that element on the PCT.
What mile would you start carrying microspikes and an ice axe this year?
I'm not super plugged into the conditions, but I know that Southern California, there's been a ton of snow there as well, like San Jacinto and I don't know, maybe even Mount Laguna. I think maybe actually Snorkel might be able to best answer that.
Yeah, so I live in Southern California, and I would definitely pick up some microspikes before going around San Jacinto. If you're even, I haven't checked to see if the park is open, whether hikers are even allowed to go in there right now. I'm sure some of you are more dialed in, but they've just shut it down because they know that it's so dangerous. Yeah, I would definitely start thinking about carrying microspikes and ice axes much earlier. And I would say there is a precedent of hikers losing their lives there. So even though you're in Southern California, the ice and snow are something to take really seriously.
If you get it and you don't need it, you can look a little dorky for one stretch and then mail it up to yourself in a future town. It's okay. I agree with Robin Roll. I also don't know exactly what the conditions are where right now. I do know from Barrel Roll, who lives in SoCal as well, that he does a lot of search and rescue stuff occasionally, and they do a ton of rescues for that area by San Jacinto. And like the big ask is just at least have some traction there so that you're not going to slip off.
For hikers with flatland snow experience but not mountaineering experience, what factors should we consider when making safety assessments of the passes and river crossings that might not be obvious?
I would say go with people who have mountaineering experience, and you're going to meet those people. Maybe you don't know them now, but you're going to meet along the trail. Or Kennedy Meadows South is going to be like, I was there again in my year, like 4 or 5 days, just like, who's going in? I don't know, we're scared. And you can that's when a group of us, like 10 of us, decided to go in together. So if you don't have that typical type of experience, I would say find someone who does and then learn from them.
I would say make every effort to get yourself to a mountain with some snow and practice the self-arresting. We talked about taking a class, but it can also be just really helpful to watch a couple of YouTube videos and then go to your local ski hill and throw yourself down it a few times in a nice safe setting. Get some confidence on using your ice axe for self-arrest.
Yeah, I had a friend who was 1 week ahead of me on the PCT in 2017, and I had taken the mountaineering class and he hadn't. And I live on a very steep street in San Francisco, or I did at the time. And we just went out on the sidewalk, and you couldn't dig your axe in, but at least you could practice the body positions and put yourself upside down and practice rolling over and those types of things. So the most ideal is find some snow, but if you have to use mud or just mimic it on concrete, the muscle memory is so key. And looking away from the ads and putting your knees in and lifting your spikes out, those are things that are not intuitive. They're, I would say, the 3 things that to me don't feel intuitive. And you want to practice those enough that that's what happens when you fall, so that you're not catching a spike in the ground from your traction and flipping yourself in a bad direction.
Okay, one that just came in. If you go straight up on a pass in the Sierras, what is the steepest you encounter? 90 degrees or 45 degrees, etc.?
I don't remember anything too crazy. I think some of them vary more than, some of them are certainly steeper than others. Mather is kind of notorious for having a big cornice to get over. So if that's where the snow kind of builds up into a lip that you have to get over. So you might have to kind of dig your way through it to get up over. But I don't remember anything. I don't remember anything feeling super steep, and I didn't have any experience at the time, so I don't know. I don't know an exact angle, but probably not more than 45, 50 degrees at most.
Yeah, I just want to tag on because I remembered a really important and scary aspect. I think it was Mather. We were climbing Mather, and I realized at some point I was not on solid snow. There were rocks and the snow had melted out from the rock, and I was on snow that was not attached to anything, which was super scary. But it brings up the point that you need to be really careful around rocks because it will melt out faster around rocks. And I was hiking through the PCT with this guy who was over 6 foot. And I have this one picture, he fell into this hole between the snow and the rock up to his chin. And that can destroy you. That can ruin your hike. You have to be so careful because you can't necessarily see how or where it's melting out. But when you're approaching rocks where you can see rocks and they're darker rocks, which are absorbing more of the sunlight, it's going to melt out faster. just be super cautious around rocks in the snow, because you could find yourself like I did on this patch that was like, I was on this pillar of snow that was not attached to anything. Luckily you didn't slide, but also you might fall through and like hurt yourself as you're falling. So something to look out for and avoid if you can.
I would also like to say really quick, this, I don't think we talked about it, but if you don't know how to swim, you might want to take lessons before you go. I actually did know a hiker who didn't know how to swim and got so freaked out by the creek crossings that he quit. So you're probably not going to need to swim, but just the fact that you know how to do it makes a big difference in your confidence. Yeah, I think we're through the questions.
Yeah, could everyone give us a little bit of a takeaway or final words, maybe something that you forgot to say that suddenly has become of great interest? And Naomi, I would love to hear your input too. I mean, we hiked the PCT in 2009, which was a normal snow year, whatever that means. But even in normal snow years, there was 10 miles of snow up to get to the top of Muir Pass. So
I would just say make good decisions. That's, you know, a lot of like what Giggles was talking about with groupthink, or like for yourself, like just make good decisions and think about things before you like let, you know, Canada get in the way of what seems good for you right now. And so sometimes that's by the minute, the decision by the minute, sometimes by the hour, sometimes by the day, sometimes this week. But just like trust yourself and your intuition. And if it doesn't, if your gut's not feeling it, then maybe wait or go around or flip.
Yeah, I mean, certainly echoing that sentiment. Just make your own choices. And in general, I think we always talk about for hiking a long distance trail, you need to be adaptable, and just doubly so for a high snow year. Be willing to change what your plan was. Just take it one day at a time, and know that what your original plan was is probably going to change, and that's okay.
Yeah, one thing that my girlfriend introduced to me that I was immensely grateful for, because I did flip around the snow on a CDT because of avalanche concerns and went back to the San Juans at the end, is like having alternate success stories. And I'm going to talk about this in an article soon with Treeline, but like, don't only have one story for what a successful hike looks like. Like if you start with just one, that's okay, but make a few others and make them based on your values. Like, do you value a challenging hike? Do you value a social hike? Do you value, like, what do you value about your hike? Do you value big miles? Like, what is it? And like, know that that can be achieved in different ways. So like once I was no longer going Nobo on the CDT, which was really hard for me to decide, but that was the right choice for me because the avalanche danger was going from nothing to like a 3. And then I had to find a way to make that hike work for me. And for me, it was picking the most challenging alternates possible. And like, that was my new story. So find stories that let you still be successful. Like Sheer was, I think, saying like, you can feel like you're a failure when you're making a choice that keeps you safe, and you're not a failure. You're just making a different choice, and like find a way to celebrate that choice.
I guess I would say it's going to be really, really hard, and it's going to mentally, it's going to be hard. Physically, it's going to be hard, but also keep in your mind that it's not always going to be like this. It will get better. You'll get stronger. You'll get more confidence, and you'll feel an incredible feeling of accomplishment once you get through it.
I guess I will do my final words. Thank you everyone for taking part in this. We will get the video up, and we'll also share some of the resources like Post Hole or Snowtel, some of the gear reviews that, and also gear items that we talked about. We'll send those over with links. And lastly, I something in the Scout and Frodo's video that I thought was so touching was something that Frodo said that about, and she said, don't let your fret and your worry about what will happen in the snow impact your enjoyment of the space that you're in. Isn't that so heartwarming? Don't let it get in the way of making friends and all the other wonderful things the trail will bring to you. So I hope that this gives you a really good base of some of the things to expect, and also how to think about going into the snow this year, and how to go about getting together resources to make good decisions. And thank you again, everyone, for being part of this. And best of luck to the PCT class of 2023. And the CDT class and JMT class of 2023 as well. Thanks, everyone.